You scroll and you see them laughing. Another party, another trip, another perfect sunset that you weren't there for. And suddenly, that quiet ache starts again. That strange mix of sadness and urgency. The thought that somewhere out there, life is happening without you. I feel that too sometimes. That pull to check what everyone else is doing, just to make sure I'm not the only one standing still. It's strange, isn't it? How a small glowing screen can make your world feel smaller. How it can turn an ordinary night into something that feels like a missed opportunity. But before we begin, take a moment to breathe. Maybe you're listening while lying down, or while scrolling before sleep. Wherever you are, this time is for you. If you find peace here, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because maybe, just maybe, you're not missing out at all. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. The comparison trap. It starts with something harmless. You open your phone for just a second, maybe to reply to a message or to check the time. But before you realize it, you're looking at a video of your friends out together, smiling under neon lights, the kind of laughter that feels like it's happening in another universe. You weren't there, you didn't even know it happened, and in an instant, that tiny spark of disconnection turns into a wave of unease. There's no sound, no direct message telling you that you missed something, yet your brain fills in the blanks. Why wasn't I invited? What am I doing wrong? It's subtle, but the mind starts writing a story where everyone else is living while you're just existing. I've felt that too. That strange pressure, that illusion that life is racing ahead and you're stuck watching from behind glass. The truth is, this feeling isn't random. It's deeply wired into us. Our brains evolved to pay attention to belonging, to social connection. Thousands of years ago, being left out of the group wasn't just emotionally painful. It was dangerous. So even today, when we see others experiencing something without us, the same primal alarm bells go off. The fear of being excluded, missing out, feels like a threat to survival. But here's the paradox. What we're missing isn't usually real. Social media is a highlight reel, not a documentary. Every story, every photo, every perfect moment is curated to feel full and meaningful. But the camera never turns toward the silence after the party, or the loneliness in between the laughs. The problem is, our minds don't differentiate. They process it all as truth. You don't see a friend sharing a 5-second clip. You see a whole world you're not a part of. It's not just envy. It's a distortion of perspective. The more we scroll, the smaller our own lives start to feel. Every post becomes a quiet reminder of what we could be doing, of the versions of ourselves we haven't yet become. It's not just about missing a night out. It's about missing the idea of who we think we should be. You might notice how FOMO never really ends, no matter how much you actually do. You can go out, you can travel, you can achieve, and still, there's that quiet whisper in the back of your mind saying, someone else is doing more. That's because it's not about the event. It's about comparison. And comparison is endless. Psychologists have found that social comparison is one of the strongest triggers for anxiety and low self-esteem. It's not just what you see, it's what your brain interprets. When you compare your everyday moments to someone's highlight reel, you start to undervalue your own life. You forget the small, beautiful details that don't get captured. The quiet cup of coffee, the soft light through your window, the peace in doing nothing at all. And yet, that peace feels almost wrong now, doesn't it? Stillness feels like failure in a world that glorifies motion. If you're not documenting it, did it even happen? If you're not busy, are you even relevant? This is how FOMO hijacks the mind, by turning rest into guilt and reflection into fear. But maybe the real trap is that we think we're missing out on the world, when really the world is missing out on us because we're too distracted to show up for our own lives. Let's pause here for a second. Think about how many moments have slipped by unnoticed because your attention was somewhere else, somewhere digital, somewhere curated. The irony is painful. In chasing connection, we lose the ability to feel connected. Here's a quiet truth. The people in those photos, in those stories, they feel it too. They look at someone else's life and wonder if they're missing out. They scroll through their own feeds, comparing, analyzing, doubting. FOMO isn't a sign that your life is empty. It's a sign that you've forgotten to look inward. Sometimes I wonder if this constant cycle of comparison has made us addicted to dissatisfaction, that deep restlessness that convinces us that joy is somewhere else. But joy was never somewhere else. It's in the moment you put your phone down and breathe. In the moment you realize that nothing truly meaningful ever happens in someone else's highlight reel. It happens in your quiet, ordinary, beautifully imperfect life. So next time you feel that ache, that pull to check what everyone else is doing, stop and ask yourself, what if I'm not missing out? What if I'm just finally here? Because maybe the real freedom isn't found in catching up with everyone else. It's in realizing there was never anything to catch up to. The illusion of everyone else. How social media warps reality. There's a strange thing that happens when you scroll long enough. The world starts to blur into one collective image of everyone else. Everyone else is out. Everyone else is laughing. Everyone else is achieving, traveling, glowing, connecting. It's not one person's life you're comparing yours to anymore. It's an entire digital collage of perfection, stitched together by algorithms that know exactly what to show you to keep you scrolling. You don't even realize it's happening. It just sinks in, quietly, until everyone else becomes this invisible standard you never agreed to chase. But somehow, you do. I've noticed that it's not even the content itself that hurts. It's the repetition. The subtle layering of moments that all look a little better than yours. The dinner tables that seem more full. The friendships that seem easier. The mornings that seem more productive. It's like being haunted by alternate versions of your own life, ones that look more cinematic, more alive. And slowly, the gap between who you are and who you think you should be starts to widen. It's wild how the mind doesn't question the illusion. You can know it's curated. You can know that it's filtered and framed and still feel small. That's because FOMO isn't logical. It's emotional. It's the emotional residue of seeing life as something happening somewhere else. The more you watch others live, the less you feel like you're living. Social media wasn't designed to make you unhappy, but it was designed to hold your attention. And nothing holds human attention better than desire. The subtle sense that you're missing something. Every scroll is a promise of possibility. Maybe the next clip, the next post, the next story will give you the spark you've been missing. But that spark never comes. Because the platform doesn't want closure. It wants continuation. It wants you chasing ghosts. The psychology behind this is fascinating and brutal. When you scroll through content that triggers comparison, your brain releases dopamine, not because you're happy, but because you're anticipating reward. That reward is the imagined version of your life, the one where you look like them, feel like them, belong like them. But you never reach it. Dopamine fades and you scroll again, and again, and again. until your baseline for contentment drops lower than it's ever been. There's a reason people say they feel lonelier after scrolling for too long. It's not just the time wasted, it's the identity erosion. Every post subtly tells you who you should be, and in trying to catch up, you lose track of who you actually are. You start performing, documenting, editing, presenting. You stop living for yourself and start living for proof. Think about that for a second. How many moments have you interrupted to make them look like moments? That sunset you paused to record, that laugh you repeated for a better clip, that silence you filled because it felt too plain. FOMO doesn't just make you fear missing out. It makes you miss while you're in it. And the irony is that everyone's doing it. The people you envy are envying someone else. The people you think are free are refreshing their notifications, wondering if they matter. It's a cycle of mutual illusion, a performance we all pretend not to see, even though we all play a part in it. When you think about it, everyone else doesn't exist. It's a digital mirage created by fragments of 1,000 strangers' lives. You're not comparing your life to someone else's. You're comparing it to an algorithm's fantasy of what perfect looks like. And because that fantasy is constantly evolving, you can never win. The moment you catch up, the finish line moves. This illusion bleeds into everything: ambition, relationships, even rest. You take a day off, but instead of peace, you feel guilty. You're not doing enough. You're not becoming enough. But enough for who? That question is where the illusion collapses. Because there is no audience, no scoreboard, no hidden jury keeping track. It's only you measuring yourself against a fiction that was never meant to be real. Sometimes I think about how peaceful life must have been before we had a window into everyone else's best moments, before we could watch 1,000 lives play out while sitting in our own, before every quiet afternoon felt like evidence of falling behind. Back then, if your friend went on a trip, you heard about it once, not through 10 perfectly edited videos over the course of 2 weeks. You experienced your own life through your senses, not through the screen. But now, stillness feels dangerous. Doing nothing feels like being invisible. And invisibility feels like failure. That's the psychological trick of FOMO. It weaponizes visibility. It makes you believe that to matter, you have to be seen. And so, you start performing your existence instead of living it. The worst part is, it changes how we perceive time. Social media doesn't just warp reality, it distorts our sense of pace. You see someone's success story in 30 seconds, but you never see the years of quiet struggle that came before it. So you start to panic. Why not me yet? You compress your expectations into impossible timelines, trying to keep up with an illusion that was never linear in the first place. FOMO teaches us to measure life in moments of exposure, not in moments of meaning. But the moments that make life rich, the ones that shape us, are rarely visible. They happen when no one's watching. In the waiting, in the building, in the choosing. But because we've been conditioned to chase instant visibility, we undervalue what happens in the dark. The more I think about it, the more it feels like we've traded presence for perception. We don't ask, how do I feel right now? We ask, how would this look to others? That question silently reshapes how we dress, how we speak, even how we experience joy. Because every emotion becomes half-lived, one part feeling, one part performance. And yet, when you unplug, even briefly, you start to notice how quiet the world actually is. The sound of your thoughts without background noise. The softness of the air when you're not chasing something. That calm isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It's the return to your own timeline, your own rhythm. FOMO thrives in disconnection. Not from others, but from yourself. The moment you reconnect with what's real, the illusion starts to dissolve. You realize that you were never behind. You were just distracted by a version of reality that wasn't yours. So, maybe the question isn't, what am I missing? Maybe it's, what am I overlooking while I'm busy trying not to miss out? Because life isn't happening somewhere else, it's happening here, in the small, unrecorded moments that no one else will ever see. And maybe that's exactly what makes them precious. Reclaiming presence, the antidote to FOMO. Maybe the real antidote to FOMO isn't cutting yourself off from the world. It's learning how to return to yours. The world will always be louder than your own thoughts. There will always be another notification, another update, another story that makes your life feel slightly smaller than someone else's. But what if the goal isn't to mute the noise? What if it's to stop mistaking it for meaning? The truth is, presence is an act of rebellion now. In a time when your attention is constantly being auctioned off, choosing to be here, fully, is almost radical. You can't monetize silence, so it disappears from the spaces we spend most of our time in. And yet, silence is where you actually remember who you are. It's where you remember what you like when no one's watching. It's where your real rhythm returns, slow and imperfect and human. There's this quiet kind of power that comes when you stop chasing what everyone else is doing. The world doesn't collapse, it expands. Suddenly, the little things start to feel alive again. The sound of your own breathing becomes enough. The morning light feels less like something to capture and more like something to be in. And you start to see that most of what you thought you were missing was never meant for you in the first place. But it takes practice, a lot of unlearning. FOMO rewires the brain to crave external validation. Every post, every like, every spark of attention becomes a microdose of approval. The more you get, the more you want. It's not that different from any other addiction. And so, to reclaim presence, you have to detox. Not just from the apps, but from the belief that you need to be everywhere at once to matter. When you slow down, the first thing that hits you is restlessness. Your body itches for distraction. Your mind keeps reaching for the phone, for noise, for stimulation. You'll open apps you don't even like, just to feel connected to something, anything. That's the withdrawal talking. That's the space FOMO filled finally becoming empty. But if you can sit in that emptiness long enough, something subtle happens. The anxiety starts to dissolve, and in its place, there's quiet curiosity. You start asking yourself, what do I actually want to feel right now? Not what everyone else is feeling, not what I'm supposed to feel, just what's mine. That's the beginning of presence, the shift from imitation to intuition. Presence isn't glamorous. It doesn't look good on camera. It's not the kind of thing that gets engagement. It's slow, repetitive, and often invisible, but that's exactly why it's powerful. When you stop trying to turn your life into a highlight reel, you begin to live a life that doesn't need highlights. You start to notice the texture of reality, the weight of your steps, the scent of the air, the warmth of your coffee. None of it is extraordinary, but none of it is replaceable either. There's something deeply healing about realizing that the moments that don't get shared are the ones that shape you the most. The ones that nobody claps for, nobody comments on. The days you stayed home, the nights you chose rest over proving yourself. The times you felt disconnected but still kept going. That's life happening, not in performance, but in practice. Sometimes you have to let go of the fear that if you're not seen, you don't exist, because your worth isn't measured by visibility. You don't become more real when people watch you. You just become louder. And maybe you're not supposed to be loud all the time. Maybe you're meant to disappear a little, to fall off the radar. to be unremarkable for a while. That's where growth hides, in the seasons that don't look impressive from the outside. It's interesting how FOMO makes even peace feel like a mistake. You'll be sitting alone, comfortable, and suddenly this whisper appears in your mind. What's everyone else doing right now? That whisper is the algorithm inside you, the part of your brain that's learned to equate connection with stimulation. It's the inner scroll, but you can talk back to it. You can remind yourself that other people's joy isn't proof of your lack. You can look at a sunset and not reach for your phone. You can be in the moment without needing to frame it. You can breathe, and that can be enough. One of the most freeing realizations I've ever had was this: you can't miss out on your own path. You can only step away from it. And the moment you step back, the second you stop trying to live through everyone else's experiences, your life starts to expand again. Not in fireworks or applause, but in warmth. It's subtle. It feels like calm. Think about how much of your anxiety comes from the idea that life is a race, that there's a timeline, that you're supposed to have certain things figured out by a certain age. FOMO thrives on that illusion. It feeds on urgency. It makes you believe that if you don't join now, buy now, post now, travel now, you'll lose your chance. But there is no deadline on fulfillment, no expiration date on purpose. You can start again whenever you want. Reclaiming presence means remembering that your timeline isn't a competition, it's a conversation between you and your life, between what you thought you wanted and what you're learning you actually need. Every time you pull yourself out of comparison, every time you choose curiosity over panic, you're strengthening that dialogue. Sometimes that means saying no, even to good things, choosing depth over variety, staying home when the world tells you to go out, and listening when your body says it's tired. Being okay with missing out on noise because you're tuning into something quieter, yourself. That's not isolation, that's alignment. Presence also means forgiving yourself for how long you've been gone. All the hours spent scrolling, comparing, wishing. You weren't lazy, you were lost, human, in a world built to fragment your attention. But you found your way here. And that's the first sign of coming back. When you start living with presence, life slows down, but it also deepens. You realize joy doesn't always announce itself. It whispers. It hides in small routines, washing your hands, folding laundry, sitting in traffic. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you simply arrive, that's peace disguised as boredom. There's a quiet magic in not trying to be everywhere. You become here. The people around you start to feel real again. Conversations stop being content. You laugh and forget to film it. You stop narrating your life. And that's when you realize how much you were missing while trying not to miss out. The world will keep spinning. People will keep posting. There will always be something you could be doing, but presence isn't rejecting the world. It's returning to it, the real one, the one you can touch, smell, breathe. You were never missing out on life. You were just missing life while looking somewhere else. So next time that familiar pull hits, that thought of everyone else is doing more, take a breath. You're not behind. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, here, now, in your own unfolding story. This is what presence feels like. Not grand, not dramatic, just real. After all this, the noise, the scrolling, the chasing, it feels good to just breathe again. To remember that you don't have to keep up. You don't have to fix anything. You can just be. If this made you slow down for a moment, that's enough. Before you go, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. And if this helped you feel a little lighter, maybe leave a like or share where you're listening from. If you want to keep finding calm together, you can subscribe so we can keep reminding each other the world can wait.